I love the resurgence of people going to cameras, actual cameras over their phones. Some people are doing it for selfies just to look better online, but a lot of people really just want to be able to capture memories in reasonable quality. Kind of like I did on this trip with my sister, where we met up with my brother and a few others up in Vermont and just had way too much chocolate that I'm still burning off a few days later. People getting into the inexpensive point and shoot cameras has been a pretty big deal as well, because they started realizing, outside of, unless something gets really hyped, but they've started realizing that they don't have to spend a lot of money for these better looking photos. Recently, I've become somewhat obsessed, I want to say, with older cameras and older lenses because I forgot how good they are. We'll get into all of this along with a photo review towards the end of the video, but for now, I'm going to take you to past Omar, and he's going to talk to you about his first impressions using the Canon 5D Mark I, the classic, for a trip. And it's kind of important because I have a lot of cameras that are considerably better. And on top of that, maybe a topic worth exploring for another video, I am a recovering gear fiend. Also obligatory, my name is Omar, I've got a new episode every Wednesday, and here is Past Omar.
Today's video is on the Canon 5D. It's a 19-year-old camera. Right now, a lot of new cameras are dropping, and a lot of people are planning on buying them who, quite honestly, do not need anything like that. They want something better than their phone, and something like a Canon 5D, which 19 years ago was a professional camera, and 19 years later still has professional features, is actually more than enough camera for them. I've been using this all day, and it's actually more than enough camera for me, at least for all my personal stuff. Canon EF glass is readily available. It's pretty cheap for the most part. Even the L series glass is pretty cheap compared to the new RF mount L series glass, or like the G Masters of the world, or the Nikors, so on and so forth. Consumerism, these release cycles, where manufacturers keep churning out newer and newer cameras with really just incremental gains, they kind of ruin cameras. People have been buying old point and shoot cameras saying the colors look great and everything, and then the same thing with film cameras, where something like a basic Canon 81 is now pretty expensive, and prices for FD glass have skyrocketed. But what people really haven't touched, because the idea of something that's digital and old being really low quality is just what we're accustomed to with phones and computers and everything. What people really haven't done yet is bought out these old digital SLRs, DSLRs, and these are not only plentiful, but also really modern. I took photos from this, attached them with a card reader to my phone, and I edited on spot. And the Canon 5D Classic in particular has been called the world's first digital film camera. Reason being is that the only thing that's digital about it is how it captures the images. There's no live view, there's no EVF, it's not a hybrid camera, so you can't shoot video on it. And truth be told, these features or lack of features make it really attractive for someone like me who's always trying to do everything. Right now I'm shooting this video in a gondola with no other people in it, thankfully, on my phone. A lot of the photos you're going to see here today are in Vermont. My sister's doing the Spartan Race, Spartan Beast. I am not the athlete in the family, so I'll leave that to her. But I decided to walk around since the colors are starting to turn a little bit in the fall. I do wish this were like 3 weeks later, but I figured it would be a good opportunity to just bring this camera around with me and take a couple of shots, see how I like them, because again, most people aren't looking to buy a camera to do professional work. They wanted to take better personal photos. Most people don't print photos, although at almost 13 megapixels, you can definitely print something that's 13 by 19 inches pretty easily. And what a lot of people forget is that if you only post to like Instagram and TikTok, those apps, I think they max out at 1 to 3 megapixels, depending on if you're going with a feed post or a full vertical story post or whatever the case is there. So if you're buying something that's 45 megapixels, 60 megapixels, 100 megapixels for the medium format shooters, and you don't need things like 16-bit files for commercial editing or anything like that, then something like this, which costs less than the average point and shoot and turns out infinitely better looking photos than they do, is probably what you're looking for. Also, if my eyes are floating around, like I forgot which lens on this phone was the ultra wide. I'll be overlaying a bunch of photos I took over this trip. The two lenses I was using was the Canon EF 50mm f1.2L and the Canon EF 35mm 1.4L Mark II. That combo altogether, including the camera body itself along with the grip, still costs less than the Fuji X100VI with the ridiculous markup, since nobody can stock them because Fuji refuses to produce more of them. We'll take a look at the images together and you let me know what you think. Also, when people say that they like the filmic look of older cameras, what they really mean is that they like the low dynamic range look. Film has about 10 stops of dynamic range, and fun fact, so does this thing. I'm about to see people, so I'm gonna turn this off right now.
And welcome back to the present. I am still so unbelievably sore, which is probably a pretty good sign that I need to get back into some kind of standard physical routine. And I want to go over some of my favorite photos from the weekend that kind of showcase the technical prowess of the camera. But the first thing I want to talk about is actually using this thing. And it was just a really enjoyable experience. Now, a lot of us are accustomed to smaller cameras, smaller mirrorless cameras, and a highlight feature of a lot of cameras nowadays is if they have a good grip. Because a lot of mirrorless cameras, honestly, the ergonomics really aren't all that great. The Fujifilm X-H2S that I'm shooting this on right now is probably one of the best cameras in terms of ergonomics, but if you go back a few years, pretty much all DSLRs had amazing ergonomics, and this is no exception. This is almost 20 years old, and it's probably one of the most comfortable cameras to use that I own. I like having battery grips on everything, and the plate is just something I add to almost everything I carry around, so I can just slide it on and off a tripod as I see fit. Now, a cost breakdown, obviously you're gonna have to look around for some of these, but the camera body cost me $80, the battery grip was $40, and then aftermarket batteries and USB-C charge kit cost me another, I think, $25. So all in, the body, batteries, and grip were under $200. Now, I already own some EF glass. This is the 50F1 that I mentioned earlier, along with the 35-1.4. I don't see myself replacing those anytime soon. I shoot a lot of commercial work on the Canon R5Cs, and that's why I still own that glass. You can find something like this on Marketplace for $600 to $700. You can find the 35-1.4 for closer to $900. If you go for just the f2 variants or the 1.8 variant or even the 50-1.4 variant, you can score a used one for another $150 to $200, and then you're about $400 all in on a setup that's not only rugged, because you have to remember, a pro camera, so it was weather sealed. This, you could probably drop it more than a few times without really worrying about it too much. And in my opinion, churns out better looking photos than something like the X100VI, which right now the best price I'm seeing them go for is $2,100 on Marketplace, and that's crazy. I know I mentioned this earlier, but this doesn't have as much dynamic range as older cameras, so the highlight shadow recovery is going to be a little different. The thing is, with modern denoisers that are built into pretty much all editing platforms, I feel like you really can push it to its limits. And we'll touch on that in a second as well. There's a lot that I can talk about this technically, but I think I do want to do maybe 1 or 2 more videos on this, maybe a portrait session as well. Let me know if you'd like to see that in the comments below, and also, this is probably a good time to shout out, like and subscribe. But let's get into looking at some of these photos, and I do want to touch on one of the bigger pitfalls that I found out while I was out there. First and foremost, continuous autofocus doesn't exist on this thing. I think it's got like 9 points. It's pretty decent. It really is a lot better than I thought it would be. I was ready to just shoot this whole thing in manual just because I have that bias. It's like, oh, it's old tech, it's got garbage autofocus. And after using it for a weekend, I understood why people call this like the film digital camera. Like if film cameras could make a digital camera, it would be this. It's essentially a film camera just without the film. You can set your ISO, you can set your white balance. You don't have to get different filters to screw on to change your white balance. You don't have to commit to a certain speed film, although I will say I definitely wouldn't go above 1000 ISO if I really didn't have to, and I'll show you why in a second. But some of my favorite photos from this weekend. So I did spend a lot of time riding the gondolas at one point because obviously it was just so much more scenic up there. And I took a couple of shots through this little slit that they had. You just couldn't get a good shot through the screen. It was all scratched up and everything, even with a circular polarizer. I don't know how these would print, but the landscape shots I took while I was up there, I think those were the most challenging ones for the camera because of the contrast in the scene. You had really dark shadows. I mean, you're on a mountain, so you're gonna have really dark shadows and really bright skies in like faraway areas. But like, the shots still look good. Would I print any of these? Probably not. To be fair, this was just me walking around handheld, and maybe if I treated it like I did with other photos where I had like an ND filter and everything, and potentially stacked 2 different shots, maybe things would look different. And that's why I'm just showing you the photos as is, because let's face facts, the majority of us just kind of go click, and that's it. Those are the photos we take. That's also how most of us use cameras and why we don't need 400 autofocus points and 30 frames per second shooting. Just saying, great marketing, handy professional tools, practical day-to-day use for most people, I don't think so. Now, I really do enjoy the gondola shots because they do look older. For most of these shots, I just played with the exposure a little bit, highlights, shadows. Some I boosted the blues and greens, but overall, like these were all phone edits for the most part. And I felt comfortable taking this because I was really just looking for memories. I didn't want to travel with a ton of gear. I also really hate phones for photos, and I do like them for video, but there's something about phone photography, phone photos in general, that just bothers me. I just don't like it. You guys kind of get it, right? The sharpening and the colors are just weird, and they don't apply that same thing to videos. So I don't know. I wish they would just turn everything off and give us full manual controls, even if it's in a different app. So they had this little sky lounge on top, and I do want to talk about this place a little bit. First off, the pricing of the food inside. So this is a photo I thought was pretty good. This photo is unedited, and the limited dynamic range kind of gives it, again, that like older filmic look. 10 stops. 10 stops is the magic number. And that turkey sandwich right there, that thing was $15. $15 for a turkey sandwich is crazy, and this is why people hate patronizing places like this. Anyway, though, that's not like the main reason why I showed you this. This was just a really good location to take a number of different shots. So there was the overpriced turkey sandwich. There's the building itself, which, small footnote, past Omar, take it away. So just a quick note out here, I've got a circular polarizer with me. I use this on most of my lenses when I'm out and about because you do get that clear shot effect. A lot of people are familiar with mostly the Pro Mist filter. The CPL is typically my favorite one, and you're going to see the difference in the glass shot here. I'll take one with what you would normally see and then one with the CPL activated. It essentially just cuts down the highlights. I love walking around with circular polarizers because they do open a lot of creative opportunities when you're out in the wild, especially if you want to shoot through buildings or shoot through windows. I stayed up at the end of the second leg, I believe, of the Death March they have there, which is just a very steep hill climb. And when I say steep, I mean people are on all fours climbing for a good mile and a half, something along those lines at some point. Started snapping away when I found my sister in this shot right here, and I want to include this shot here because of how the camera focused. I had it on zone focusing, then I tried to take it to single point focusing real quick, and it just didn't work out. It kept picking up this guy in front of her. So that would be an example of when I would switch over to manual real quick, although you can actually just adjust it right then and there and then take a shot. But you know, I just wanted to showcase that. And then I saw someone with a camera thinking they were staff, but they weren't. They were actually racing with a Sony camera. So I naturally had to get that shot. Buddy, if you're watching this and you want the photo, shoot me a message. I'll send it your way. I took a few shots of people, and this is generally not very difficult. I don't know how a strafing sport shot would actually work, but I do have an older 120-300 lens, and I wouldn't mind making a video on that with the setup here if anyone's interested in it. But like, as far as documenting this and taking photos of people, you know, lifting things, the shots look great, and they certainly look a lot better than they would if you took them on your cell phone. Here's where it started getting dark, and this is kind of where the camera started falling apart. So on these photos, I raised the exposure, lifted the shadows, and I just clicked the simple denoiser in Lightroom. That did a lot for the low light capabilities of this camera because they're almost non-existent. You can put a fast lens on, image quality up until 800 ISO looks phenomenal. The 1000 to 1250, like, it starts falling apart a little bit, but they're still pretty usable. And then when you go into these shots here, towards the end, totally unusable. And when I say that, I mean to the point I didn't even know that was my sister there. This is what it looked like. With 1600 ISO and me trying to like save something, I could not recover anything from these shots whatsoever. And this is after running it through the Lightroom denoiser. Still useless, still kind of useless, not really like a great shot, but I can at least identify her in the photo, and also you can see how aggressive the cleanup was while restoring a ton of detail, and that is super impressive. I ran the same photo through Topaz Photo AI, and this did a much better job. So I don't know if I'm going to be renewing that subscription or anything, but this is really decent. At least not for the denoiser. For the other face recovery and stuff, it's actually super handy. But that combination of the older tech and then modern editing techniques really increases the value proposition of something like this because it makes up for that additional shortcoming. Because if there's one thing that needs to be addressed on these older cameras, specifically the Canon 5D, it's the low light performance. It just does not exist. ISO is not something that's scary to me or anyone who shoots regularly because as long as the quality of light is good, like you actually have fill on a person's face or something, then the photo will be fine. Example being when I'm shooting sports these days, I'll typically keep the ISO on my camera, whether it's one of the Fujis or the Canon R5C at maybe 1200 to 1600 ISO. And that's what I'm shooting in high contrast areas. Like athletes are going from a really bright area to a really dark area, and I can't be bothered fiddling with the ISO. And I personally can't stand auto ISO. I don't think anyone does it well. I've also shot regularly up to 6400 ISO, and the images, even without any corrections, look really good. But this camera, like I'm telling you, 1250 is where I would really cap it, unless I was planning on doing a ton of work or there was some specific reason why I had to go to 1600 and I couldn't lower the shutter. So if you're someone who takes photos in a lot of really poorly lit environments, then maybe skip over something like this. It's the Achilles heel of the 5D Classic, but it got better with the newer iterations of the 5D, and the 5D Mark III is still affordable and handles low light a lot better. You can watch my buddy Hunter's review. I'll put a card somewhere above here. Take a look at that if you are someone who's typically in a darker environment and you don't have the option to carry lights or anything with you at any time. Maybe something unnecessarily technical. We're talking about an almost 20-year-old professional camera. So this is me just really ribbing it here, and it's not there, but it's there, and it's competing against everything else. Do I think you're gonna find another camera $200 to $400 that outperforms this? Absolutely not. Not even close. Not for photos. But this did kind of open Pandora's box, and I bought like some really funky old Sony point and shoot that I think I want to do a photo on next. And with that being said, tune in to a new episode next Wednesday, and I'll catch you guys then.